Well, welcome everyone. We've got a good group on the call today. I'm going to get started, and this is our fifth webinar in this Developing Broadband Leadership series. Today is our webinar that's entitled Moving a Broadband Project Forward. So our wonderful co-hosts during this whole series has been the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society and the Illinois Office of Broadband. And we welcome Bill Coleman, who's been diligently working with communities in Illinois and with the Benton Institute to provide assistance in planning for broadband development. And he's going to be giving remarks today before welcoming our panel of presenters as well. And so before I turn it over to Bill, I want to encourage participants to utilize the chat space to ask questions at any time during the presentation and discussion. So as it comes to mind, go ahead and enter those comments or questions in the chat, and Bill will pose those questions to presenters either during the session or in facilitating a discussion with presenters at the end as well. Just to let everyone know, I'll be sending a follow-up email to those who have registered for today's session or any session. This will contain the slides and any other materials along with the recording from today. We also have several recordings from the previous webinars. I'm going to put that link in the chat so that you can see where those recordings are on our site. And I'll also include a link to our local government education webinar series so that you can see upcoming webinar information that we have with that extension program as well. We hold it for just local officials as well as community leaders and anyone else who is interested in getting relevant and timely information, as well as a bit of professional development along the way. All right, so thank you so much, and looking forward to today's presentations and this topic. Really appreciate everybody for participating, and I will hand it over to you now, Bill.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I want to thank Illinois Extension, as well as you in particular, Nancy, for the excellent assistance we receive in launching these webinars, a collaboration of the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, especially the Office of Broadband, and the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, for whom I'm doing work for under the Illinois Connected Communities program. It's really great to have this support and know all this technology works on our meetings. So I appreciate your help, Nancy. Here's for the agenda today. Nancy did a little introduction there. I'm going to do just a brief overview, kind of as this is our fifth event in this series. One was a little ad hoc on the mapping, but was very useful, I think. But really, in overall, this community broadband development process, we've heard through these initial seminars about broadband 101 kind of activities. We've heard about some programs and financing and so on, but really wanted to bring this now down to the very practical process. We're going to do a little review of what we've gone through in the first several webinars. And then, but turn it over then to our guests, Jesse Shackleton and Kevin Clone, industry perspective on how to get broadband done. And I think that's especially important in Illinois, where communities now are really just realizing the importance of their role in trying to solve their broadband shortcomings. And so as communities become more engaged, they need to know more and more about how broadband providers see a marketplace and see how communities can be an important part of the process to accelerate broadband investments that might be made, or if you're in an area where broadband investments might be limited, both now and into the future, how to change that and flip that so that you can get the broadband infrastructure you need in your community. And so why community involvement? You know, the number one thing is that infrastructure investments meet long-term community needs. And we know that through history, towns that were not on a river or towns that were not on a railroad or interstate highway systems tended to fade out over time. And the same is happening now. It's not a future-oriented perspective, it's a today perspective. If you don't have high-quality broadband services, not just in your town center or in the suburbs, but really throughout your economic watershed, you really need to think about that, because it's a real deterrent for things like education and healthcare, precision agriculture, home-based businesses, and so on. Decisions are being made every day now by companies and investors about where to put their dollars, and broadband is an essential infrastructure, and know that it needs to happen. Communities and providers, to have an effective partnership, really need to have their values in sync. So again, what's the best interest of the community? Strong emphasis on community economic development, and so on. So having your community involved in trying to drive investment in your community, that having that being in sync is really important. Most communities, when they are involved in broadband investments, ensure that 100% of the community is served. Sometimes providers will say, and we see this many times, a provider will plow fiber through the industrial park and maybe up and down Main Street, but leave the rest of the community unserved. Or they may do the county seat, but not do out in the rural areas. And so having half a community served becomes more and more problematic for economic development, for community development, and really just for the equity considerations. In larger communities, urban areas, sometimes places where providers see wealthier customers, more new suburban development, they'll serve that, but leave lower income areas unserved. And that becomes just one more challenge for those communities. Tying right into this digital equity concern, communities many times are worried about affordability. And again, this 100% community coverage. When everyone agrees that the competitive marketplace makes changes happen. If there's a third wire into that community, adding to the existing phone company and existing cable company, we know that that marketplace really changes. There's often kind of a rule of thumb, you need 40% of the market to be successful. And that goes 2 times 40 is a very comfortable kind of margin for 2 providers. When you add that third provider, it definitely changes the marketplace and gets to be a lot more competitive, better pricing, and many times much improved customer service. And then again, finally, risks and rewards are shared. Many times we see the need to, providers are looking for incentives, but you want to make sure that if that project goes well, that the community benefits in many both cash and non-cash benefits. This is a chart constructed by the Blandon Foundation, who I also do work with in Minnesota. And it's kind of what we say is our community broadband development process. And I just want to touch on this briefly today. The idea that awakening now, the importance of broadband, beginning that community discussion and gathering facts. But once you do that, focusing on the right side of this equation, you might find that your infrastructure and services are generally adequate and provide a pretty good platform for economic development. On the other hand, if you're going through this work and trying to do this evaluation, you're probably motivated by existing shortcomings in services and your ability then to decide what to do next in terms of attracting better broadband services. But I want to emphasize here, and we're not going to touch on this today, but we will in our next webinar, is the idea that are your users really tech savvy throughout your community with business, education, healthcare, government, homeowners, small businesses, so on. many communities find that they fall far short in this idea, and that the broadband networks that are in place are not really being used to their utmost value, even if the networks are even mediocre. Most likely you'll find that users do lack sophistication, not knowing on how to make best use of that technology. And one thing I would add on this is, over the last 2 years in particular, we've seen a lot more emphasis on digital equity and affordability. So maybe I'd add a third bullet here, that users can't afford computers and devices, and that certainly is a strong deterrent to more effective broadband use. But I'm going to shift a little bit to talk about some of these the process here and this awakening idea. The pandemic has certainly changed everything, with people trying to work from home or going to school from home, and in some households 3, 4, 5, 6 people trying to do these Zoom calls. Community leaders, community residents have really discovered the shortcomings of the broadband in their community. And we see kind of driving consensus. And Matt Schmidt from the Office of Broadband was talking just yesterday to our team about the increased awareness at organizations like the Illinois Counties Association and other places about how important broadband services are. Beginning that community discussion, again, many times this used to take a lot of education to kind of hear what's important in the community, but still it's important to identify community broadband champions, and that the most successful community broadband initiatives are led by these folks that are maybe a mayor, or maybe just somebody who's out in the woods or out in the farmstead who has strong need for technology and is committed to making things happen. So I can't emphasize enough that finding these champions and supporting them in the pursuit of better broadband is really essential. And then gathering facts, provider interviews, talk to your existing providers, talk to prospective ones who are in the towns nearby, talk to folks like the gentleman we'll hear from in a few minutes about what is the real circumstances with the broadband infrastructure, finding out about the availability of fiber optic middle mile networks that communities can hook onto for bring higher quality broadband to the community. Surveys of businesses and residents are really critical. A lot of times the surveys of community members can be done with online with paper surveys, both surveys that are statistically valid, it can be important, but more and more it's just how many people can you get up to sign up to say, we want better broadband in our community and we're willing to subscribe to it. Mapping is a critical issue. The state of Illinois, the Office of Broadband, has just released its updated mapping system, which is quite sophisticated and can really begin to show you where broadband services are and where they're not. We know that there's shortcomings to all that mapping. The maps are provided or created using data provided by broadband providers, and they tend to be pretty optimistic about what their services are. Especially when it's on a wireless service or on a DSL service that have kind of uneven coverage. And so mapping is a great starting point. Supplementing that is a broadband speed test you can use to get down to address level service qualities, and kind of use that as a second source of information for where broadband is and is not. Many times you get your best information from business through focus groups and interviews as opposed to surveys. Their needs and their services are much more complex, and so hard to capture with surveys. So getting those businesses together to understand their needs, their reflections on current availability and pricing, customer service, really important. And then these community technologists, people who sell and service computers or do networking or do website design, they can be real windows into the real situation your community is facing, because they deal with trying to help their customers get better internet every day. Next steps, knowing if your services are inadequate, working with your existing provider to upgrade the network certainly seems like the simplest step. It's the most cost-effective step in many ways, but it's also maybe the most difficult. Those companies may be headquartered many states away. They may have very high investment hurdles for their dollars. They're publicly traded companies. They may decide that, hey, we need to get our money back for our infrastructure in a relatively short period of time, 24 to 36 months. Whereas, it's infrastructure. That tends to be an asset that pays out benefits over time to those providers. This is an interesting situation because we know that most of the benefits of a broadband network accrue to the community, not necessarily to the provider. And so there's an imbalance there about who's doing the investment and so on. Trying to attract a competitive provider that will come in and build a brand new network. That is a challenge for communities to come up with a finance package using federal, state, local dollars, the provider's own dollars. It's just really like an economic development program where you're trying to bring in a manufacturer or a grocery store. How can you help that competitive provider make the business case to make the investment in your community? And then finally, developing a public sector solution where it would be more of a utility that everyone in the community would have access to that. The beautiful thing about public sector solutions is that they really just need to break even, or even maybe not even break even, because of all the other public benefits that a quality broadband network will provide. Communities and providers have very different balance sheets. So on a provider's balance sheet, it's mostly that cash flow, profit and loss, stock price, and so on. On the public sector solution, that would include the availability of telehealth, or distance learning, or economic development, home-based businesses. And so as providers have one set of criteria to make decisions. The communities have multiple other choices. And you can see here, conducting a market study, developing technology alternatives, the feasibility study that essentially makes a business case for this, working with your community to say, yes, let's do this, and then driving market development activities. So more people subscribe to broadband, more people decide to subscribe to really high quality, high bandwidth commercial services. Those are all things that communities can do to help drive investment in the community. And so here's the things that are in that feasibility study: the market study, the tech alternatives, engineering and costing, developing that business model, and then thinking, how can we drive forward with this through partnerships and financing, no matter which business model you would undertake. This is called the diamond model of participation. You can see there's lots of things, and this is very much a broadband development process. In the beginning, you're thinking, what's the problem? Coming up with early conclusions, and people have their opinions and maybe very diverse perspectives. You have to get through that groan zone, that decision-making process, to come up with that solution. And so just know that this is not an easy process for communities to go through. There's so many different considerations that go into this and public decision-making processes and so on, that it can be very much a challenge. And then finally, my advice to communities is never ever tell your incumbent provider that the community would never want to own or operate the network. That is a solution. You may not really want to do it because it gets complicated. You may have lack of resources and expertise in your community and so on. But that is a stopgap measure that you can use to say, look, we're going to solve our problem one way or the other. If we can't get a provider partner to help us, we're going to do it ourselves. And there's literally hundreds of successful examples across the United States where this is the case. You'll also hear about those efforts that have not been successful and have been a real financial challenge for communities. But at the end of the day, that network, if you build it, that's there. And it's going to be operated. Somebody will come in and operate it. And that's an asset the community will have for the next generation or two that you might not have otherwise. When you do a feasibility study, you'll find out that that network is going to cost X millions of dollars. And many times the public sector says, oh, well, we can't do that. That's too many zeros on the end of that project. Recognize that a network is not like a road. A network actually generates revenues. And so know that there's funds available to help pay off those capital costs over time, especially over time. The beautiful thing about the public sector investment is that instead of trying to do this in 2 or 3 or 5 years, you can finance over a much longer time, 15 to 20 years, and you can pay off those bonds. Especially at this time where rates are so low, it's a real opportunity. Don't exclude any of those partnership opportunities without careful study. And so I think as you go through that process, go through that growth zone or grown zone, you can really decide which of these alternatives will work for our community. So don't come to too many conclusions too early. And then finally, don't sabotage the future for a quick solution. Sometimes communities jump to say, well, let's do a fixed wireless solution because that's faster and cheaper and everything's going wireless. Well, know that everything's going, even on wireless, goes on fiber. And so the more fiber you have in your community, the better off you're going to be. So remember that when you make choices around technology and business models, that's going to have an impact on the community, either positive or negative. And so the idea of, many times a wireless solution kind of violates that public idea that everyone should have service, because most times those wireless solutions leave at least some portion of the community behind with little or poor service. And then just never ever give up. We know that some communities are in this over a period of multiple years in pursuit of better broadband. And so the key thing is to think about how can we keep this initiative going? How can we look at different alternatives? Be ready for the financing kind of possibilities that come up. Communities that have done broadband planning a year ago, 2 years ago, are very well positioned to take advantage of all these dollars that are coming from the federal government, both through the ARPA dollars or NTIA dollars that are in play right now, and then the future infrastructure bill that looks like it has a different or has a real opportunity to pass here. So getting going on this planning, never too soon to begin that. And so that's kind of my overview. And I just want to kind of set the stage for this industry perspective that we're going to hear from now. We've got two very experienced expert folks who are going to lead. We're going to just have a discussion format, go through some things here. Jesse Shackleton works for Joe Carroll Energy. And Jesse is, as I read his resume, is got strong background in utilities, electric, natural gas, and now broadband. He's the director of broadband operations at Joe Carroll Energy, and but started his life up on the telephone pole as a line, or I guess that would be an electric pole for Jesse. I know they get sensitive on those things. but has directed field operations, key management positions. And so Joe Carroll Energy is a cooperative located in Northwest Illinois that provides electric, gas, and broadband services to about 28,000 accounts. Welcome, Jesse. Thanks for joining us. And then Kevin Clone has been a real ally of the Illinois Connected Communities program, sitting in on multiple committee meetings for communities across the state. Kevin is sales director for Vantagepoint, and they're an engineering consulting firm that works with many telecom providers, internet service providers in Illinois and across the country. So we're lucky to have great folks here doing on our team. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and end that show. Good. Jesse, how did your electric co-op decide to go into the ISP business?
All right, great kickoff question, Bill. And just a quick sound check. You can hear me okay, correct? Excellent. Before I get to that, if you don't mind, I'd like to segue right off one of your final comments in your last slide that talked about never ever. One of the points was exclude partnership opportunities. There were two that I pulled away from that. And I just want to be clear as we go through this presentation or discussion, you know, as Bill mentioned, Joe Carroll Energy is a cooperative. We are a legacy electric cooperative in Northwest Illinois. And based on that partnership opportunity, we're going to talk to some of that on how we're starting to work not just for, but with our local communities. Every relationship or partnership is founded on trust. And, you know, we just want to point out that it's a not-for-profit cooperative business model. It's a very trusted model. We think it works very well in a rural setting. We've been around for 85 years, not quite as long as a lot of the communities we serve, but certainly a long time. And so we really feel that we're founded locally and entrenched right alongside of our rural entities here in terms of possibilities for partnerships. We feel there's some really good fits and we're pursuing those. And we look forward to talking about those opportunities here throughout this afternoon here. The other bullet point was never give up. And you know, if there's a synergy that I can really speak to, it's about rural grit. And for those of us on the call that represent rural communities, which is probably pretty much the majority, if not all of us on the call, it really does take some roll up your sleeves, some true grit and grassroots efforts. And that's what we were founded on. And so I think we share a lot of synergies there. So just wanted to point out a few of those key points to kind of glean from and segue off of. So how did your electric cooperative decide to go into the ISP business? So back in 2007, we acquired an investor-owned service area on the electric and natural gas front. And so we basically tripled in size. We were a small little co-op. The for-profit investor-owned was pulling out of the area just because they didn't have favorable returns for their stockholders. And so we ended up acquiring that service area and adopting those folks into our member-owned co-op network. And with that tripling in size, we took on, I think we went from 10 small substations, we acquired 20 additional. So at that point, we had a strong need and urgent need to get smart grid communications out to our key assets, to our substations, to make sure that we could provide the value-added services and response times and up times on the electric system, and then also the natural gas system as well. So it was really about a SCADA smart grid, if you will, getting communications out to our substations. And at that same time, we were adopting an advanced metering infrastructure, an AMI platform as well. So we had a need to get the backhaul for that up in place. And so you kind of hit on it, like what's kind of cheap, easy, and quick was a wireless solution initially. So we developed an architecture that initially was just meant to backhaul all of our substations, gas and electric, in our metering infrastructure. As we were doing that, our elected board members from our different districts throughout a rural area started to get a lot of feedback from their constituents that had little or no access to any broadband at all. And so it was presented and proposed to start offering basically internet service, retail internet service off of these same access points. So that's how we got our foot into the door becoming an ISP. We started out on the wireless side as a WISP. Northwest Illinois is a beautiful spot on earth. We're at the southern tip of the Wisconsin driftless area. And that's relevant to this discussion because when you look at ubiquitous, a need for ubiquitous coverage, trees and beautiful hills and rolling landscapes are not conducive to a wireless architecture. And so we found that out real quick. And so long story short, our OpEx costs started to increase. We felt we were providing inadequate service. The reliability of it was subpar. And we were hearing about it from our members. We were trying hard. We certainly had positive intent, but it was, we were fighting an uphill battle. So then fast forward to 2016, one of our member communities came to us, and the incumbent provider for internet service in that community, it was a copper medium, just wasn't fulfilling the needs of that community. And so again, having developed the relationships with those folks, they came to us, a cooperative who's founded, in the spirit of rural development, starting with electric, saying, hey, you did electric so well, you guys have heard the story, the Benton Institute, the state, everybody's done a good job of telling it, but we did such a good job with the electric. Can you guys potentially provide a similar solution on the broadband side? And so that's where we looked at our first opportunity to enter into the fiber spectrum as a solution that would provide the best return on infrastructure, is what I would call it, because it really is a future-proof solution. Yes, we all know it's heavy CapEx. We partnered up, Kevin's on the call here. We partnered up with his group at Vantagepoint Solutions. That's where we kind of kicked off our relationship with them. Did a feasibility study, went in and developed a project there that had about a 50-50 overhead to underground architecture. So we were going to get our feet wet. We wanted experience on both fronts to really get an idea of what we were getting into. The response that we got from that local community was outstanding. I think within about 6 to 8 months, we had most of that project, that what we called our pilot project, built out, and it covered a lot of the storefronts in this downtown community. And I believe, if I remember the numbers correctly, it was over 100 businesses that we passed. And within the first pass and coming online, we had something like a 60 to 70% of those businesses jumped onto our service and have been with us ever since. And the majority of them that didn't initially have since. So that really is maybe a little bit of a long way around, but that's how we decided to get into the ISP business. Was for smart grid initially. Started out as a WISP. The WISP wasn't adequate, and so we ventured off into fiber. And I guess that might segue into our next question here, Bill.
Good. Well, thanks. And before we do that, I'm going to ask Kevin to talk a little bit about what a company like Vantagepoint does and how you position yourself to work with providers and communities.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking that, Bill, because I was going to jump in on that one. Just for the benefit of everybody on the call, Vantagepoint is an engineering and consulting firm. So what does that mean to you on the call? From the consulting side of our business, that's where we do the feasibility studies that have been mentioned. We can work with clients as they evaluate that. Right now, there's just an insane amount of funding opportunities coming down the pike, either available in Illinois via Connect Illinois or from the federal side. But our consulting side will do the feasibility study piece, finding the funding. If there's an award that comes up, we do the regulatory reporting, the compliance reporting, that kind of stuff on the financial, the regulatory financial side. And then the engineering side of our company, we are definitely, without a doubt, a very strongly fiber first engineering firm, although we've got 10 PEs on staff, and depending on how you want to define our engineers, north of 300 people on the engineering side. We do wireless engineering. We have lots of clients that do wireless engineering or that we work with on the wireless side, but we're definitely the fiber first side. So I think it's good for the audience members to understand that I am not a provider in Illinois. I don't have an exact count, but I'd say it's probably north of 30 providers we work with, primarily tier 3 rural electric cooperatives like Jesse and a fair number of the independent telephone companies in Illinois, and including some municipal utilities as well. So we've got a pretty broad spectrum of clients we work with, but with the vast majority of those being independent phone companies that either commercial or cooperative companies. So that's the kind of hopefully that hit the mark, Bill, on what we do. But I want to tack on a little bit to what Jesse said, because he's got some very personal experience about what Joe Carroll's worked through as they decided to get into the ISP business. Again, in their case, largely driven by the electric cooperative needs of AMI. We're going to do a wireless system, and then the broadband piece kind of grew out of that. But I think, in fact, I'll kind of give you two stories. In Illinois, the very first electric cooperative we worked with in Illinois was Illinois Electric Cooperative, based out of Winchester. And this goes back quite some time now, but I know they did a study from 2009 through 2014. And geographically, they serve 5 counties out of Winchester area. I know Calhoun County, for example, that's kind of the peninsula county that goes down towards St. Louis. But in those 5 counties, over that 5 years, they had a net housing starts of 1. So their board was largely driven at the time of economic development. We need to do something, like most rural communities, they'd experienced the brain drain, and what's going to make them attractive to be here. And this is long before all the lessons learned from COVID, but that's what got them to start into the broadband world. And I think largely, and Jesse would attest to this, the electric cooperatives we work with, both in Illinois and nationally, are largely driven by member service. Now, certainly COVID has had a big bright light on broadband needs, but it's generally been by and large rural areas that aren't getting the service they want from their incumbent large providers. I fall on the side, there's nothing wrong with making a profit. It's just that some of the large publicly traded companies just have different motives, and that's how they choose to go about it. But what happens in those cases is you've got large swaths of rural America that aren't served. And the electric cooperatives, in some cases, the independent telephone companies are positioned that they can say, hey, let's go serve these members. They need broadband to be not just for the schooling that we've all learned about, but it's just true economic development of, Joe's cycle shop with their 5 employees. We want not only just to help them grow, but we want them to stay here and not move off or not go out of existence. So there's a very large component of member service / economic development. And then if you really want to dive into the weeds on, again, speaking about electric cooperatives nationally, there is an element that comes into play of, revenue replacement in some cases where load needs are going diminishing of some sort. And Jesse can give you a song or chapter and verse on what's happening there. But so there's some revenue replacement, and other progressive cooperatives are in the boat of broadband is just another utility. So, why do electric cooperatives get into the ISP business? By and large, without a doubt, it's member service. Call it 1A and 1B, if you will. 1A member service, 1B economic development, for sure. And that helps drive the betterment of the people in their region that they serve.
Good. Thanks, Kevin.
Sure.
Jesse, do you want to tell us a little bit about your current projects?
Yeah, this is it's pretty dynamic right now, given all the funding that Kevin alluded to, and I think a lot of people on the call are probably aware of as well. So as Kevin mentioned, and I talked about earlier, in 2016, we did transition from a utility focused build out. It very quickly became obvious the demand and the need. We listened to our member owners, both individual member owners and community owners as well, community members. And it wasn't long, and the script flipped right up on it, upside down on its head. And this was really very obviously a member first, community first driven initiative here. So I mentioned the grassroots movements. So we worked very quickly, and we wanted to have kind of an easy button, if you will, to survey and listen to the members. So we actually worked with speaking of collaborations and consortiums, we partnered actually through an introduction with Vantagepoint, with Adams Telephone down in Quincy. They had a really good kind of crowdsourcing platform that they had developed, And so we worked with them to get that set up on our end. So on our website now, anyone in our area, any rural members or even non-members in our area that have an interest, or in a lot of cases a need for robust rural broadband, and specifically our fiber, can simply go and sign up, and it puts them on the map, so to speak. So that's kind of a real-time, ongoing, never-ending survey, if you will. And we're able to identify where the strongest grassroots movements start to pop up. So that's originally how we started to focus on this. Because of the high CapEx investment to build out fiber, we couldn't just go out, build it, and hope they would come. We really needed to have, you know, all of our ducks in a row, and be very diligent and fiscally responsible, and make every precious capital dollar go as far as it could go, as quickly as it could go. So that's how we started to drive a lot of our projects, was that grassroots movement. You know, after from 2016 moving into 17 and 18. And then that was about the start of all the funding opportunities. I know the FCC CAF 2 project came out. They had the experimentals followed by the CAF 2. We were still getting our head wrapped around things at that time. There was a couple of USDA, RUS Community Connect grants. We did go after a couple of those. We struck out the first time, we tweaked a couple things, and we landed one the next time. So we have, in addition to multiple projects throughout our service area that are what I'll call grassroots initiated, where we had a strong, high concentration of members react and respond via our website and raise their hand and tell us, hey, if you bring it, we'll take it. And we've done that in multiple projects. And in addition to that, we've been very aggressive partnering with Vantagepoint and submitting application after application to try to reduce the CapEx costs and expedite the build in our area. So we did get in 20, I believe it was in 2018, we got an RUS Community Connect grant. Then we were successful. That was a $2.5 million project. We were successful with an $18 million Reconnect award, a total project cost of $18 million. And we currently have, we were successfully awarded a Connect Illinois award also, but because of timing, we submitted the same area 2 different ways to see which one we would get. And we actually ended up getting both the Reconnect and the Connect Illinois State Award. And of course, we respectfully declined the state grant. That was a 50-50 and went with the 75-25 federal grant. So, you know, I mean, that was kind of a no-brainer, you might say. Right now, we're waiting to hear back on an application on another Community Connect grant. Again, those are, I think the maximum application was, I think the max on that one was 3 million, I believe. But we were just right around that amount for that project. And then right now we're working with a collaboration effort with the state of Illinois, and I know Vantagepoint is assisting us with that right now, trying to go after an NTIA, their broadband infrastructure program grant. And so we're working with the state of Illinois in a collaboration effort. So again, that's kind of a little bit of give you an idea of the projects that we're working on right now. We do have a map that we post publicly out there. It's connectsp.com. You can go to Fiber Communities and you can see all the different projects in Northwest Illinois that we're working on. Maybe I'll stop there for now, Bill, and we can talk about some of these other collaboration efforts here as we get to it.
Oh, good. So Kevin, an electric utility, of course, they have an area they're trying to fill in as they go broadband. You work with a lot of other providers. How do they decide which areas they're going to target?
Well, first of all, just real quick, Bill, in the chat, I put, Jesse referenced the software solution from Adams Telephone Co-op out of Quincy. It's called Checkpoint Solutions. I put that in the link to that in the chat. And I also put Jesse's website, connectsp.com in the chat, which will show you their service areas. Now, to your question about, very specific to electric cooperatives, how do they decide where to build out? It depends where you're at nationally. Every state has different rules as to whether or not they're allowed to leave their membership boundaries or not. Now, in the case of Illinois, that's not an issue. Joe Carroll or any electric cooperative for that matter in Illinois could build wherever they wanted to. But, again, largely it's, for the most part, I mean, painting with a very broad brush now, Bill, and audience. For the most part, it's going to be their membership first, their membership areas first, and then largely driven by their substations. I kind of tell people as I run around the country that essentially every electric cooperative in the country is going to have fiber to their substations over the course of the next decade. So those become de facto collection points, if you will, or wider centers, data centers, central offices, depending on what you want, terminology you want to use. Those become the hubs that people build out from. So generally, it'll work off of a network built out where their substations are at. I think the larger question from the electric cooperatives is, are they going to do it? I've had 2 conversations today in different states. I would argue, and I argued this last week at the Fiber Broadband Association meeting, there's 844 electric cooperatives nationally. So let's just call it 900. I would argue there's a third that are doing something like Illinois Electric Cooperative, like Joe Carroll and a couple others in Illinois. There's a third that are not. And then there's that third that are in the middle saying, how do I get in the game? How do I become engaged? And I think for the audience members on this call, it's maybe an element of how do I engage? And again, I'm speaking to the electric cooperatives, but this will be true for the independent phone companies as well, is how do I engage that local provider? Because I called big company X and they never answer the call. But that third of the electric cooperatives in the middle, I think they're looking for, again, Kevin's opinion, how can I be part of the solution without being the guy, so to speak, without being the ISP? How do I get in the game? Maybe it's a case of, and I'll pick on Jesse in this case of, hey, Jesse, or hey, Joe Carroll, I'm from community X. I'm 102 miles away from Elizabeth, Illinois, where they're headquartered. Any chance you'll come my direction? And Bill, I'll say this on this end, you've heard me say this a million times, a cup of coffee and a sandwich will go a long way to solving some of these problems, where sometimes it's a case of the community just calling up a Joe Carroll Energy and guys like Jesse and saying, I'm 102 miles away from Elizabeth. What's it going to take to get you to come my way? And whether that's a call, and again, Bill, I'll use an example from the last cohort of Connected Communities winners, the Leadership Council of Southwestern Illinois. Then I believe it was 8 counties that collared East St. Louis. And in the communities, they were surprised to learn that there were 34 broadband providers that claimed service in those areas. Where pick on the big guys, everybody kind of knows AT&T and Charter or Charter Spectrum, but there's a lot of other providers that you might want to reach out to. So, how do they decide where to go? I think you've got electric cooperatives that are saying, I need to serve my members, needing to serve my members first, generally. But at the same time, they want to expand or may have a blue sky plan. And it's a case of how does the community that's kind of in Jesse's blue sky plan, for example, how do they wave the flag high enough so that Jesse can say, boy, I'd like to go, I kind of want to go southwest, don't really know where to go. The economics may not be right, but maybe Mary, the mayor from City X, calls up Jesse and say, I'm kind of in your blue sky plan, and just how do you make those connections? So I think it's a little bit on both sides of making that connection. But that's a long answer, Bill, to your question of how they decide where to go, but it's very nuanced once you get beyond just the member part of it.
How do you identify those 34 companies in your area?
Well, the easy way, and we all know it's kind of not the greatest way, but the easiest way is via the FCC Form 477. Those are the maps that everybody universally just says, hey, these stink, right? As far as a granularity perspective, but it does give you a pretty good idea of who's in the area, who's serving in the county north of mine, for example, that maybe they have a blue sky plan to come south. That's a good first place to start, and that's publicly available information.
Good. People are asking for the contact information. We'll definitely provide that in the chat.
Absolutely.
And if both you guys could do that, well, one of the other guys is talking, that would be great.
Sure. I also built on that one, just to add in, although I personally, I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but Vantagepoint does have an office based out of, we've got 7 offices nationally. One of those is in Springfield. So we've got a local presence, brick and mortar presence there.
Good. What assets and data are most important for communities to bring to prospective providers? Jesse, do you want to lead on that?
Sure. So again, definition of community. So when we look at like a municipal area, so in the state of Illinois, where it's either defined as a village of or a city of, all rural in our service area. I don't think we have one community that's over 3,500.
Yeah, so we'd include a county as part of that.
County, yes, and a village, yes, thank you. Whether it be a village, a city, or a county, exactly right. So assets and data. One, when we go into certain areas, a big thing for us is, and because we've been doing it for 85 years, is easements, and every state is different on that. So even though you can get the funding, nothing's for free, not even free money. There's all kinds of, I'll call red tape and nuances and things that make it very challenging. But easements, I mean, you have to secure the easement rights, and we try to work very closely. We respect each and every parcel and landowner. But when it comes to community involvement, I think, easements are not really an issue when you're working with the villages or the cities. So we've been very successful in working with each of those respective municipal communities to get use of village owned or city owned property, essentially using the utility easements or utility rights of way, to get into those areas. Once you leave those areas and you get out into the county element, then it's a whole different ballgame. Then you're dealing with each landowner specifically. The other thing, I guess, would be is the capital. It's kind of the elephant in the room. Is we always sit there and say, listen, for us as a co-op, we're shovel ready. We have all the key players in place, whether it be key staff, personnel, contractors. We're basically shovel ready. What holds us up from expanding outside of those, formality things that I kind of talked about, is really the capital dollars. And so I think finding these partnerships and understanding what people can allocate potentially to a rural broadband solution, it can help us build out faster and to a broader area.
Evan?
Bill, just for the benefit of everybody, I got one question sent to me directly, just in case I wasn't very clear. There's a question about which form from the FCC. It's FCC form 477 is where you can get the information. But your question is what assets can community bring to help broadband providers? And this requires communities somewhat to dive into what's happening in their local region, but any kind of competitive information they can bring to the discussion. I know some communities will do, earlier in your bill, you had some slides about community engagement and member surveys, et cetera. I think, and I'll continue to pick on Jesse in this case, if a community, not too far outside their comfort zone were to come forward and say, we've done these surveys locally, we've got this kind of member engagement, here's the areas of need, that's a whole big piece of that early feasibility blue sky thinking that Joe Carroll is going to do. If the city of Bunksville, 50 miles from Joe Carroll service area, comes forward and says, hey, Jesse, here's this on the plate. We've already done the market study. We've already done the assessment of the needs assessment. We've evaluated what assets we have to bear, whether that's maybe some existing fiber, existing duct, access to city-owned poles, whatever that might be. But to kind of understand what the things that Jesse's looking for are going to have to do in that early feasibility study stage. If a community or township or county can come forward and say, hey, Jesse, or any provider for that matter, we've done this already. We've taken a look. Here's the things that we have that's on our plate. We've kind of taken this candidly 6 month plus monkeying around. They're going to do as they evaluate where to go. You've already done it and said, hey, I've evaluated this. Now, I will also very candidly say that there's a fair amount of time that we'll see some of these market surveys and assets brought to bear where a county or a township will say, boy, we've got 3 miles of duct. And it's like, oh, great. That's 3, sometimes, frankly, I think sometimes there's an overestimation of what the value of that is, where if somebody said, hey, Jesse, we've got 3 miles of duct, and Jesse might say, yeah, that's great. Amen. We love you. Be part of the process. But this project has 83 miles of duct on it, right? So there's just have a good understanding of what you bring to bear. Billy mentioned it with the last cohort. I think a lot of folks just, earlier, Bill, you mentioned the number of zeros. I think a lot of townships and counties don't recognize the amount of zeros that are in some of these projects. So, and that goes to the next thing I was going to bring up is just the capital. Anything you can provide will help grease the skids, for lack of a better term, of having a provider come into your area. Find those, like I mentioned earlier, find those ones that are kind of in that area, and then realize what you've got that you can bring to the plate to make it easier for Jesse and other providers to build out in your area.
Okay, good. And we see, the fiber duct, the conduit is certainly one thing, sometimes existing fiber. We've also seen some communities provide a spot for kind of a central office in a place that already has backup power, those kind of things. And certainly those community surveys, if you have names of people who say, we want broadband, that's certainly an important thing. Kevin, you talked about blue sky plan.
Yeah,
can you clarify what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for that. That's standard lexicon for me. A blue sky plan is what I call it. If the Brinks truck backs up and says, here's a gajillion dollars, where would you go? So as providers like Jesse and others, we always encourage them, again, from the engineering and consulting side, when you draw your circle on the map of here's kind of the area I want to serve, do the blue sky thing. You've got money's no object. Where would you like to go? I'm just talking with my hands. I can see it just appearing on the screen, but draw a bigger circle on the map. Like, this is my blue sky plan. This is my money's no object. Where would I go? Perfect world scenario, right? And please take to heart the fact that the clients that we work with, the only reason they need an engineering and consulting firm is because they're doing something. They're not sitting back and kind of resting on the laurels. So we come from a little bit of a distorted view that the people we work with, like Jesse, already, by the time they call us, they've already got a kind of that blue sky plan in mind. We help guide them on where that blue sky could go, or how big it could be, or what the opportunities are there. So, I apologize. I kind of just throw that blue sky in there, but that's kind of where I'm going with that one. Bill, did you ask about funding? Yeah, got to rambling there. Did we lose Bill?
I was muted, sorry.
Sorry.
My dogs were getting restless, so I.
Somebody's
So the funding opportunities, it's gotten so complicated now. It's never been more complicated, and all these different resources and different requirements and timelines, and 50% and 75% and RDOF and non-RDOF and those kind of things. Can you talk about, the best ways to figure out what's the best program for you, for a community or for a provider?
Yeah, I can jump in on that, Bill. So, you mentioned it's all those different elements, and in part the funding is what helps drive, I guess, where we go next and how we build, because of what you mentioned. They're tied to a timeline criteria, and so it's either a potential 2-year, 3-year, or 5-year build out requirement on the different programs that we've been involved with. So that does obviously come into play in terms of how you prioritize your build outs. The funding piece, as with any grant program, there's always a matching side of that. And what we're finding is that during the review process, I think what the grant programs like to see is if there has been some sort of discussion and even an official partnership between entities locally, for us as a cooperative, working with our different counties and municipalities, and just having a conversation. It's just, don't let there be any elephants in the room. So we're engaging each of the respective counties that we're building out in. I mentioned this NTIA program. You have to understand the rules. You have to be obviously very mindful of, we'll call it the chain of custody of the funding. For example, being careful not to use a source of federal funding as a match towards another federal program and risk some sort of disqualification factor. So you really have to have your pencils sharpened on this. But ultimately, having the conversations, identify the critical mass folks to bring to the table, and simply start with a conversation. And that's what we've been doing, partnering with, working through potential partnerships with folks like our counties, for example. And in this case, we're talking about, everybody's aware that the different communities and counties have recently been allocated certain ARP funds. And if, one of the qualifying ways to allocate those funds is to rural broadband. And, we're sitting here saying, hey, we're a co-op, we're a trusted partner, we're ready to get to work. We're already working on a lot of other funding avenues. So if anybody out there with ARP funds is ready to carve out a certain allocation towards rural broadband, talk to us. And as I said, we're shovel ready.
Jesse, you want to talk a little bit about the event you hosted at Eagle Ridge also?
Yeah, sure. We recently we hosted an event. I got with Kevin and said, Kevin, we've been working so hard. We've been very successful with all these grants, and we're just getting started. We don't have any extra time, but we really got to stop, take a deep breath, celebrate our accomplishments to date, and kind of let everybody know what the near-term vision is of what we're going after next. And so we invited the several of the county leaders, economic development leaders of the region to this event to basically show them what we've accomplished to date, and then give them a heads up on where we're going, and look for any opportunities to partner up on this. That's going to hopefully better the chance of us getting funds into our rural area here. That's going to benefit everybody.
Well, is there any opportunities? There's a question about how to use E-rate as a one more financing tool. E-rate goes to schools and libraries and healthcare providers, and so that's a big source of funds. And kind of in the old simple days, a lot of those funds were used as anchor tenants on middle mile networks that helped provide some of these fundings. I know that there's been some changes on that. Kevin, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, I was, if the people on the call are familiar with it, it's called SHLB, the Schools, Healthcare, Libraries Broadband Coalition, SHLB Broadband Coalition. They just put it on email, so that's why it's top of mind for me. But there's the $7.2 billion emergency connectivity fund that there you go. Adrian just put it in the chat. Thank you. I think the opportunity there, because like you said, Bill, it's not just for the traditional anchor institution, but you can now use hotspots and for Wi-Fi and for connectivity. I think there's the opportunity there to get creative. Now, that program closes, I think it's on like August 15th or something. It's the window. I see Adrian nodding. It's very, very short, but the creativity part of it, a lot of the money that's coming down the pike, yet to come yet, and still being formulated, the money doesn't necessarily go to the providers like a Joe Carroll Energy or somebody else. It's going for public safety or economic development or healthcare. So, and this gets to be a little tricky as well. We have argued, Vantagepoint with our clients have argued that people like Jesse and others need to be engaged with the healthcare system, the public safety system, the schools, and the economic development folks at the chamber. Jesse mentioned the event they did with their economic development people. You need to be engaged there so that they're aware that that you're interested in building out, but also to let them know, frankly, that there's this money. Some of them just don't know. Like, I mean, I just say Kevin's the school administrator from some town in Illinois. Well, I know there's a 7.2 million out there, 7.2 billion out there. I know I can do something, but I kind of don't know which provider to engage. I saw a question in the chat earlier about how do you find out which ones are worthy, I guess, for lack of a better term. But that money is out there. Reach out to your providers and say, hey, how can we, there you go, Adrian put another great little link in there. How can we get to, if I'm a school in Joe Carroll's area, hey, Jesse, how can we find some way to utilize or go after the 7.2 billion in funding? Is there some opportunity? We've kicked this around internally with some of our clients on, because the funds can be used outside of school now. Hey, Jesse and Joe Carroll, could you come up with a way? We've identified 87 households in our school system that are unserved for some reason. Is there some way we can put in an application, something creative to say, hey, Jesse, you pay for the, Joe Carroll pays for the drops, and we'll see if the E-rate funding, we'll put in to see if we can get E-rate to pay for the access point in the house, or something that can solve, when we're trying to solve the same problem here, right? We're all trying to grow broadband access. It's how do we make use of the funds that are available based on what the criteria for award is. So there's an element of getting creative. So not only do the outreach, but also get creative on what can now work and where can you get some of that money. So again,
Yeah,
Bill, I give you a long answer there.
And just to kind of add on to that, Bill, you mentioned early on, you talked about challenges for folks, especially in rural areas that might be, financially, financial hardship or whatever, but the digital equity and affordability, and maybe through the E-rate program, you talked about some of the hardware devices, whether it be a computer or heck, even we're starting to dabble and see a very positive return on using VR for training here, just because the brain science behind it and the retention and ability to apply that knowledge is increased by a factor of 300% in some studies using VR. So again, we're just always trying to think outside the box, partner with folks, try to get as much funding as we can to assist with increasing overall quality of life from all perspectives. There was in the chat there a question about Joe Carroll, if we're ETC certified. We are not at this time. We are providing the EBB services, which does not require the ETC certification, but we are in the process of getting ETC registered so that we can continue once EBB program funding runs out, which essentially it's stated that that's when it will end. If and when that does run out, we want to continue with the Lifeline program, which does require us to be ETC. So we are working on it, working on that right now.
Jesse, are you doing that via the Illinois Commerce Commission or directly?
Yes, yeah, we have to go that path. Yep.
What are you seeing in terms of the most effective ways that communities are supporting your grant applications? Letters of support are certainly one thing, but any other activities?
Definitely letters of support, for sure. And, beyond that, I think it's just having the conversations, looking at ways to leverage the funding, so that, again, I look at if we're in alignment with the funding and not out there with everybody has positive intent, but if we're going opposite directions, the net result for the rural folks, probably the net result is going to be different than if our arrows were pointed in the same direction. So I think from a funding perspective, it's like, okay, let's figure out the synergy, the partnership, and then together come up with a strategic plan that's going to get the widest expanse of coverage that we can as quickly as possible. So I would say definitely letters of support, continued conversations, ultimately funding opportunities.
Yeah, I'll just check on that. The letters of support, and the more specific, the better in the letters of support. If it's from the schools, we joke about, and Jesse's heard this story before, we had a client submit for a grant award. They had letters from kindergartners written in Quran about, I want a computer kind of thing, right? So, but very specific letters to support. And also on the funding side, certainly money that is a number M, right? X point X million matters, but also along with that, I think sometimes it's even just a case of, hey, the community put in, whether it's the community themselves or maybe foundational support locally, whatever that might be, to say, we've committed $25,000 to to work on the feasibility. So some number, some dollar number to show just that extra measure of engagement locally. I mean, funding is critical, as Jesse's mentioned, and we've talked about it ad nauseam, but a dollar figure to show we're doing the best we can somewhere along the way.
Okay, interesting.
So also, Casey Peterson, there's a long question in there. I was trying to read the question and listen to Jesse's answer.
So I was going to take a shot at that. It's about convincing community elected officials that broadband is an important thing to invest in compared to roads and ditches or whatever, human services, whatever county commissioners have to do with. And I'll tell you, we just been working with a county in Minnesota where they knew that their county commissioners were reticent to become involved in this. And so when you think of designing your community surveys that you're doing, one purpose is to convince a provider that there's a marketplace there. The other purpose is to convince your local elected officials that there's overwhelming support for public participation in these projects. And so in this county that I'm working with, they made sure, of course, they had the survey online and they had little postcards that go online. They organizers got the list of addresses from a particular county commissioner's district, and they actually spent the money then to mail surveys to the people in that commissioner district. So they got a huge response back. And they just reported back to us that they had a map that showed where all the surveys came from. And this commissioner's district was full of them. And people had really responded to the survey. And when they put that on the map, that was really an eye-opener for that commissioner. He had kind of said, oh, the people where I live, they don't even have computers or whatever. Kind of a negative view of his own constituents. But in the end, then after they made their presentation, that commissioner was the one who made the motion to spend money on a feasibility study to move forward on a project, take the next step. So I think that's a real intentional engagement of your elected officials, whether inviting them to public meetings or the survey work. And the other thing we did with that commissioner is we had a commissioner from a neighboring county who was a broadband champion in that county, actually called the commissioner in the second county and kind of said, here's why I'm involved in this. Here's why this is important to our county.
Thanks, Bill. Those are both great recommendations, and I think those would be applicable in our situation too.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And on that one, you can talk about political will and how do you convince local elected officials, but I think if you go to, if they say, well, we don't want to spend money on broadband, we want to spend money on healthcare. Amen. I get that, right? There's finite resources and you have to decide where to spend those dollars. But I would argue, as you're looking kind of through the check boxes, if you will, on public safety, healthcare, education, economic development, you talk to those people on the way and you ask them where their priority needs are, broadband is going to be within the top two at worst, right? It's on the public health side. We've had clients work on this as well on the mental health side of having the ability for schools to set up classrooms, rooms where somebody can see a psychiatrist at school because I can't drive the 20 miles to 30 miles plus to go see someone. I just think broadband underlies a lot of stuff that we're, like I said, public safety, healthcare, education, economic development. The broadband piece, that's one of those, I'm a broadband guy, right? But if somebody's saying, well, we don't really need that thing, like Jesse said, nobody's got computers, like you just want to shake somebody, like, man, open up.
One argument I always make is that this is actually a problem that county commissioners, elected officials can solve. Because this is one that is an infrastructure, kind of write a check and the problem is solved for a generation, as opposed to.
It's not a blue or red issue or a DRNR issue, right? It's you've got to be connected. And I speak from experience. I live in Milwaukee. I have a connection from AT&T and a connection from Charter, and I have two because neither one is reliable. Right? So I get it that you've got to have high quality, reliable broadband at your home and place of business. And it's just, again, I'm jaded, I'm biased, but broadband connectivity is critical.
Yeah. I'm interested in both your perspective. If a county just sits back and waits, says, oh, there's all this money coming, somebody's going to come in, whether the electric co-op or the incumbent or somebody is going to come save us. What's the validity of that thinking?
Jesse, you can go first.
Yeah, I guess for me, when it comes to, the initiative and the, that's, trust me, if you're a county in our area, we will be knocking on your door if you sit back and, respectfully requesting any kind of contribution or assistance that might be practical or viable that you could provide to the cause. I certainly would encourage anybody from that perspective to Kevin's point earlier is look around and even Bill, it was in your slide, right? Just open it up, look for those existing incumbent opportunities, look for the people that best align with what your initiatives and strategic goals and initiatives are, align with your core values, find those folks and sit down and have a conversation. Certainly, and like to Kevin's point, look for those blue sky opportunities, be innovative just with your train of thought. It's as simple as that. Starts with a conversation and think outside the box. And what we've found is we can usually, just about the time we think we're running out of options and opportunities, we sit down, we circle the wagons, we start having conversations, and all of a sudden another opportunity bubbles up.
There's a question in the chat about going off campus and how far E-rate things can be used. I know that's a lot of these programs are there's rules and then there's gray areas. And I think there's a lot of people who push the boundaries on the E-rate and say, well, okay, well, punish us if we screw up. And so that's why that Shelby group is such a powerful group. I think they're the real experts in the E-rate utilization. They work that 724, 365 to, that is their key thing. So there's a lot of great information and case studies there on that Shelby site. What are the most challenging, most frustrating things about working with communities? When you see, oh man, that community blew it, or they're being difficult for no reason. What are those things? What roadblocks do communities put up that are hindering their broadband investment?
For me,
so Bill, sorry. Oh, I just wanted to say something because it sort of goes back to the question of my county guys don't want to invest in broadband right now. Look, $65 billion, which is what the infrastructure bill is talking about, first of all, is not going to build out everywhere. And I think there's a big debate about this issue of fiber. Okay, so originally the bill said the speed should be 100 download and upload speeds, but it got pushed down to 100/20, which is what most cable companies are giving you. So it was a political pushback. So this idea that you should just lay back and wait for fiber to appear, I think is a very dangerous assumption. And it really is going to the points that Kevin and Jesse have made. The community has to be there pushing and scrounging for appropriate funding and making sure that a number of providers are going to come in and bid for, if they exist. And in an area like Peoria, you would hope that they would, because it is a population center in Illinois. But I think that, the lack of competition, the lack of multiple providers, the more providers you can bring in, if it's possible for the communities to sustain multiple providers, it's more positive in terms of better service, better pricing, And so I do think that this is not the time to sit back on your heels because there's so much money and so much opportunity. If the community just lets that pass by, I promise you there is not going to be a moment like this again, because the pandemic has totally driven need. And that's the reason why we're seeing all these pots of money at this point. So I don't know, Kevin, I see you nodding your head, so
nodding,
please
and-
reinforce.
And I mean, like I mentioned at the onset, I'm the sales guy for an engineering and consulting firm, right? You would expect me to tell you to build, but I can tell you, I've been in this business for 28 years, and we all thought the stimulus time in the 08-09 period, that was just crazy, ridiculous money. Look at all this is just nuts going on, right? And the money now is a full order of magnitude bigger. I mean, this is money like never been seen before. And this is kind of the one shot in time to say, okay, if I'm going to be aggressive. Now, again, I fall on the side of that communities. I think you're going to be way better off, my opinion, to call one of your local providers and say, hey, Jesse, how can we make this work? As opposed to starting right now and saying, boy, I want to do this myself. And Bill, your original question was, what's the most frustrating part about working with some communities is oftentimes, candidly, it's just very, very slow. And we've got to wait till the next board meeting. Then we didn't have quorum. And it's like, man, the world is moving. Whereas if a community can say, I want something, Jesse's nearby or some other local providers nearby, even if it's a case, I put my number in the chat. I mean, I've been covering Illinois for over 20 years. I know a lot of the providers. I'd be happy to tell you, call Mary over there and Mary can get you in touch with and get you started. And I'd say the name Mary off my cuff. Mary Schwartz at Madison Communications in Staunton, Illinois. It's an independent family-owned telephone company who assisted a lot of people in the first cohort. That's the kind of person that you'd say, hey, Mary, I'm X miles away. What's it going to take to get over here? So the frustration that I see from the community side is just the slow nature. Jesse's ready to go, and the communities are just like, okay, let's think about it. You guys on the municipal side, and I'm picking on people collectively here, it's very slow at a time that you need to move very fast. These funding things are coming down the pike, and we keep telling our clients, if you're on time, you're late. Be ready. Have this plan in place. Jesse's heard this from me a million times about this big circle blue sky plan. There's providers out there that want to move. We just need to get people matched up. And I know I put a plug in for Matt Schmidt in the broadband office. They've even got on their website, they're trying to do the handshakes to introduce Mary to Fred to say, you guys might be aligned. But the frustration really can lie in just the time it takes for some of this. And then also take into account some of the comments that have been in the chat about how do we convince Commissioner Fred that broadband's important? It's like, as a broadband guy, I'm just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So I kind of got off on a tangent there, but it's just frustrating sometimes. And I see it from our clients where they talk to somebody and then nothing happens. Jesse, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think, some of the frustrations that we probably see is just managing slightly different expectations. We all have our own agendas, if you will, and short-term and long-term plans, work plans, etc. So I think it's just a matter of sitting down, determining mutually what is the end game here and the goal, and then through that partnership, determine who's going to own which part of it. And in our case, we're coming in, we're a not-for-profit co-op, our broadband division, we're a multi-divisional cooperative. So the broadband division is a core business unit. It's not a subsidiary. Everything that we invest, it's really, as Bill mentioned, our main goal is we just have to cost cover to own, operate, and maintain the system. And our goal is to build it out as quickly as we can so that the rural membership, whether it be the counties, the business owners, the individuals themselves, can realize some sort of net return on it, bolstering tax base, bringing in small families that help the schools, develop and grow, et cetera, et cetera. So it's probably managing in a lot of cases, I think we all want the same thing. It's just we're speaking slightly different languages, and it's just trying to find that synergy and that critical path, if you will, so you can get there in due time, because the more that we're not quite on the same page, as you mentioned, timing is of the essence. Adrienne spelled it out. She called it out. This will not go on forever, and so we need to be best prepared to take advantage of those opportunities as they come before us.
I think as a closing, I think it's really important to remember that many of the providers who want to build have some limited capacities. And so you think, okay, well, we'll find a partner. Well, partners might be hard to come by because there's only so much staff, there's only so many construction crews, there's only, it takes time to negotiate the deals and to do the applications, and resources are limited in many of these companies. Electric co-op is probably on the high side of sophistication and capacity compared to other small and medium-sized companies sometimes. So just it's like waiting until the last moment to try and get a date on Friday night. Everyone might be out already and you're left home, and so you don't want to be that. So I really want to thank Jesse and Kevin for their participation today. It was really fun to hear the conversation and to listen to that experience. I hope you listen to their recommendations and get prepared. Our next session is in a couple weeks, and then we're going to take a swing at the digital equity questions, which fit into a lot of this. Many of the people who are unconnected now need to be connected so they can get to school, to get their health care, and so on. So a lot of these things, although they're two very different topics, they really come together at about what kind of life can you have without internet connectivity these days. And so again, so thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Jesse. I really appreciate it.
Bill, I just put my contact information in the chat. I know that as we were speaking there are a lot of things coming there, but if anybody wants to contact me offline, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. I think you can tell I'm a pretty candid speaker, and I'm happy to share what I've got.
Yeah, and I'll put both your contact informations into my slides. I should have done that originally, and I might even have it. I forget what's in my slides now, but we won't share that. But Nancy always puts those for download along with the video of this, and so I encourage you to share this. Share this with your county commissioners and elected officials so that they can learn in a safe space and not just get pounded by constituents, but can get some great information from these two excellent speakers. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, friends.
Thank you.
See you guys.